My parents banned my 5-year-old daughter from Christmas, claiming she was too disruptive for their perfect family gathering. But when I arrived unannounced to drop off forgotten medication, I found my brother's twin boys surrounded by mountains of expensive gifts while my little girl wasn't even mentioned in their holiday plans. What happened next changed our family forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Cassandra Holloway, and I'm 34 years old. I live in the coastal town of Millbrook Harbor with my daughter Juniper, who just turned 5 last month. Juniper is my whole world, a bright, energetic little girl with wild auburn curls and an infectious laugh that can light up any room. She's also autistic, which means she experiences the world differently than most people. To me, her unique perspective makes her absolutely perfect. To my parents, Reginald and Beatrice Whitmore, she's an embarrassment they'd rather hide. Growing up in Millbrook Harbor, I was always the family rebel. While my younger brother Nathaniel followed every rule and exceeded every expectation, I questioned authority, pursued art instead of business, and generally refused to fit into the pristine mold my parents had crafted for their children. When I got pregnant at 28 with Juniper, unmarried and from a brief relationship that didn't work out, my parents' disappointment reached new heights. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for how they would treat my innocent daughter. From the moment Juniper was born, the difference in treatment was stark. My parents, who lived in the affluent Crescent Hill neighborhood of Millbrook Harbor, would visit occasionally but always seemed uncomfortable around her. When Juniper was diagnosed with autism at age 3, their discomfort transformed into something much uglier: shame. They began making excuses about why they couldn't babysit, why family gatherings needed to be quiet affairs, and why maybe it would be better for everyone if Juniper and I didn't attend certain events. Meanwhile, my brother Nathaniel had married his college sweetheart, Penelope, and they'd had twin boys, 7-year-old Jasper and Julian. These boys could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Every minor achievement was celebrated, every sporting event was attended with enthusiasm, and every school project was displayed prominently on my mother's refrigerator. The contrast was heartbreaking, but I told myself it didn't matter. Juniper had me, and my love was enough. I work as a freelance graphic designer, running my small business from our cozy cottage on Seaview Lane. It's not glamorous, but it allows me the flexibility to be present for Juniper's therapy appointments, school meetings, and all the extra support she needs. My parents never understood why I didn't pursue something more substantial, as they put it. Nathaniel, on the other hand, had followed their blueprint perfectly: MBA from Thornfield University, executive position at Meridian Financial Group, beautiful home in the same exclusive neighborhood where we grew up. The favoritism wasn't subtle. Birthday parties for Jasper and Julian were elaborate affairs with hired entertainers, custom cakes, and guest lists that read like a who's who of Millbrook Harbor's elite. When Juniper's birthdays came around, my parents would send a card with a modest check and make excuses about being too busy to attend. "Maybe next year will be less hectic," became my mother's standard refrain. Family dinners were exercises in patience. My parents would spend hours discussing Jasper's soccer achievements or Julian's academic performance, while any mention of Juniper's progress in speech therapy or her artistic talents was met with polite but disinterested nods. When Juniper would have a meltdown, a normal part of her autism that we'd learned to handle with patience and understanding, my parents would exchange those looks. The ones that said everything without words. The breaking point had been building for months. Small slights, forgotten invitations, and increasingly obvious attempts to exclude us from family events. But I never imagined they would stoop so low as to ban a 5-year-old child from Christmas. The conversation that changed everything happened on a frigid December evening, just 2 weeks before Christmas Day. I had been excited because, for once, my mother Beatrice had called to discuss holiday plans in advance rather than her usual last-minute invitations. "Cassandra, dear," she'd said in that carefully modulated voice she used when delivering unpleasant news, "your father and I have been discussing Christmas arrangements." My heart had lifted with hope. Perhaps this year would be different. Perhaps they were ready to embrace Juniper fully into the family celebration. "We're planning a very special gathering this year," she continued. "Nathaniel and Penelope will be bringing the boys, and we've invited the Ashfords, You remember them, don't you? They're considering Nathaniel for a partnership position. The Ashfords were old family friends and influential members of Millbrook Harbor society. I could already sense where this conversation was heading, but I tried to stay positive. That sounds lovely, Mom. What time should Juniper and I arrive? The pause that followed lasted an eternity. Well, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. This gathering is quite important for Nathaniel's career prospects, and we need everything to be perfect. You understand? No, I don't understand. What are you saying? Juniper can be unpredictable. And with such important guests, we can't risk any disruptions. Perhaps it would be better if you celebrated separately this year. The words hit me like a physical blow. You're uninviting my 5-year-old daughter from Christmas because you're ashamed of her? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Don't be dramatic, Cassandra. It's just one Christmas. There will be plenty of others. But I knew better. There wouldn't be plenty of others. This was my parents drawing a line in the sand, choosing their social standing and Nathaniel's career over their own granddaughter's feelings. As I hung up the phone that night, something inside me shifted. I was done protecting my parents' feelings at the expense of my daughter's emotional well-being. What I discovered 2 weeks later, on Christmas Eve itself, would expose the true depth of their favoritism and set in motion events that would finally force our family to confront the truth they'd been avoiding for years. The favoritism in our family wasn't something that developed gradually, it was apparent from the moment Juniper took her first breath. I remember holding my newborn daughter in the maternity ward at Millbrook General Hospital, exhausted but filled with overwhelming love, when my parents arrived for their first visit. The contrast between their reaction to Juniper and their response to my brother's twins 3 years earlier was impossible to ignore. When Jasper and Julian were born, my mother Beatrice had spent weeks beforehand preparing the perfect nursery at her house, complete with matching cribs, designer mobiles, and enough baby clothes to outfit triplets. She'd taken a leave of absence from her volunteer work at the Millbrook Harbor Historical Society to help Penelope with the transition. My father Reginald had immediately started college funds and began planning their future educations at prestigious institutions. But when Juniper arrived, the response was markedly different. My parents showed up to the hospital empty-handed except for a single bouquet of flowers from the gift shop downstairs. They stayed for exactly 20 minutes, making polite but distant conversation about the weather and hospital food while avoiding looking directly at my daughter for more than a few seconds at a time. She's quite red, isn't she? My mother had remarked, as if this was somehow unusual for a newborn. All babies are red when they're first born, Mom, I'd replied, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. My father had checked his expensive Cartwright watch twice during their brief visit. We should let you rest, Cassandra. Recovery is important. They left with promises to check in soon that felt hollow even as they spoke them. The differences only became more pronounced as Juniper grew. My parents' house on Elmwood Avenue had always been a showcase of family photos, but the distribution told a story of clear favoritism. The main hallway featured a progression of professional portraits of Jasper and Julian at various ages, their first steps, kindergarten graduations, Little League victories, school plays. These weren't casual snapshots, they were expensive studio photographs in elegant frames, arranged with museum-level precision. Juniper's photos, when they appeared at all, were relegated to less prominent spaces. A single picture on the refrigerator, tucked behind shopping lists and appointment cards. One small frame on a side table in the guest room that hardly anyone ever entered. Even when I provided beautiful professional photos of Juniper, the same photographer who had captured countless images of the twins, they somehow never made it to the main display areas. The gift disparities were perhaps the most painful to witness. For birthdays and holidays, Jasper and Julian received elaborate presents that demonstrated thoughtful consideration and significant financial investment. When Julian expressed interest in astronomy, my parents bought him a professional-grade telescope and enrolled him in the junior astronomer program at the Millbrook Planetarium. When Jasper mentioned wanting to learn guitar, they purchased a high-quality instrument and arranged for private lessons with the city's most respected music teacher. Juniper's gifts, by comparison, were generic and impersonal. toys clearly purchased at the last minute from whatever store happened to be convenient. Books selected without any consideration of her interests or developmental needs. When she went through a phase of fascination with butterflies, I mentioned it to my mother, hoping she might incorporate this interest into her next gift selection. Instead, Juniper received a generic doll that had nothing to do with nature or her current passions. The most heartbreaking disparity was in time and attention. My parents attended every significant event in the twins' lives with enthusiastic participation. Soccer games, school concerts, art shows, science fairs, they were always there with cameras, cheering from the sidelines, and bragging to anyone who would listen about their grandson's achievements. But when Juniper reached her first developmental milestones, their interest was minimal. Her first words, first steps, first day of preschool, these moments passed with barely an acknowledgement from her grandparents. When she was accepted into the specialized early intervention program at Brookstone Academy, an achievement that required months of evaluation and waiting lists, my parents' response was a distracted, "That's nice, dear," during a phone conversation primarily focused on Julian's latest soccer tournament. The autism diagnosis at age 3 marked a turning point in their behavior. What had been subtle favoritism became overt avoidance. My parents, who prided themselves on their social standing in Millbrook Harbor's elite circles, seemed unable to reconcile having a granddaughter who didn't fit their image of perfection. "Have you considered special schools?" my mother had asked delicately after Juniper's diagnosis, as if autism was a shameful secret that needed to be hidden away. "She's thriving in her current program," I'd explained. "Her teachers say she's incredibly bright and creative. She just processes information differently." Of course, my mother had replied, but her tone suggested she didn't really understand or want to understand. The social implications became clear during family gatherings. My parents would orchestrate seating arrangements that placed Juniper at the far end of the table, away from their important guests. When she would engage in stemming behaviors that helped her regulate her emotions, hand flapping or rocking, my mother would shoot me meaningful looks that clearly communicated her disapproval. "Can't you make her stop that?" she whispered during one particularly painful family dinner when the Cromwells, another prominent Millbrook Harbor family, were visiting. "She's not doing anything wrong," I'd replied firmly. "This is how she processes sensory input. It's perfectly normal for her." But normal wasn't what my parents wanted. They wanted the kind of grandchildren they could showcase at the country club, brag about at charity galas, and use as evidence of their family's success and sophistication. The twins, with their neurotypical development, athletic abilities, and academic achievements, fit perfectly into this vision. Juniper, with her unique needs and different way of experiencing the world, represented everything my parents couldn't control or curate about their family image. As Juniper grew older and more aware of these differences, I watched her begin to internalize the message that she somehow wasn't good enough for her grandparents' love. She would ask why Grandpa and Grandmama never wanted to play with her like they did with her cousins. She wondered aloud why they never seemed excited to see her drawings or hear about her day. Breaking my daughter's heart wasn't something I was willing to tolerate, not even for the sake of family peace. But I had no idea how deep the favoritism ran until that devastating Christmas Eve discovery that would change everything between us forever. The financial disparity between how my parents treated their grandchildren became impossible to ignore as the children grew older. While I struggled as a single mother working freelance jobs to make ends meet in our modest cottage, my parents lavished expensive opportunities on Jasper and Julian without a second thought. When the twins turned 6, my parents enrolled them in Millbrook Harbor's most exclusive private school, Ashworth Preparatory Academy, where tuition alone cost more than I made in half a year. The school was known for its rigorous academic programs, state-of-the-art facilities, and connections to the most prestigious universities in the country. My parents didn't just pay the tuition, they also covered uniforms, textbooks, extracurricular activities, and even hired private tutors to ensure the boys maintained their academic edge. Meanwhile, when it came time for Juniper to start school, my requests for financial assistance were met with vague excuses and suggestions that public school would be perfectly adequate for her needs. Millbrook Elementary was a decent school, but it lacked the specialized resources that could have helped Juniper thrive. I spent countless hours advocating for appropriate accommodations, fighting for speech therapy services, and researching programs that might better serve her unique learning style. Have you looked into the scholarship programs? My mother suggested when I mentioned the challenges Juniper was facing in her current educational environment. Surely there are resources available for children like her. The phrase, children like her, stung every time she said it, as if Juniper belonged to some separate category that didn't warrant the same investment as her neurotypical cousins. I had indeed researched scholarships and grants, spending late nights filling out applications and writing essays about Juniper's potential. But the competition was fierce, and most programs had waiting lists that stretched for years. The extracurricular disparities were equally stark. Jasper and Julian were enrolled in every activity that caught their interest: tennis lessons at the exclusive Millbrook Harbor Country Club, sailing classes at the prestigious Harborview Yacht Club, piano instruction with a former conservatory professor, and art classes at the renowned Meridian Arts Center. Their schedules were packed with enriching experiences that cost thousands of dollars each semester. When Juniper expressed interest in art classes after seeing some of Julian's work displayed prominently on my parents' refrigerator, I approached my mother about the possibility of enrolling her in a program suitable for her age and abilities. Art classes can be quite expensive, my mother replied, despite having just written a check for Julian's private sailing lessons the week before. Perhaps you could find something more budget-friendly. There might be community center programs. I did find a wonderful adaptive arts program at the Millbrook Community Center that specialized in working with children who had different learning needs. The instructor, Mrs. Delacroix, was patient and creative, helping Juniper express herself through various mediums while building her confidence. But when Juniper excitedly showed her grandparents a painting she'd created, a vibrant butterfly garden that demonstrated remarkable attention to detail and color coordination, their reaction was lukewarm at best. "That's very colorful," my father commented, barely glancing at the artwork before turning his attention back to Julian's latest academic achievement report. The social exclusions became more pronounced as the children grew older and family gatherings became more elaborate affairs. My parents' dinner parties and holiday celebrations were carefully orchestrated events designed to impress their social circle and reinforce their status in Millbrook Harbor society. These gatherings featured the finest china, professionally catered meals, and guest lists that read like a directory of the town's most influential families. During these events, Jasper and Julian were presented as the perfect grandchildren, well-dressed, articulate, and trained to perform on command. They would recite poems they'd memorized, demonstrate their musical abilities, or engage in sophisticated conversations with adult guests who praised their intelligence and poise. My parents beamed with pride during these performances, clearly relishing the admiration their grandsons received from their friends. Juniper, when she was included at all, was expected to remain quietly in the background. If she exhibited any behaviors that my parents deemed inappropriate, stemming to self-regulate, asking repetitive questions about topics that interested her, or becoming overwhelmed by the sensory input of large gatherings, I would receive sharp looks and whispered requests to handle the situation. During one particularly painful Thanksgiving dinner, Juniper had become fascinated by the intricate pattern on my mother's antique serving platter. She was gently tracing the design with her finger, a behavior that helped her process the visual input and find calm in what was becoming an overwhelming sensory environment. The gesture was completely harmless and actually demonstrated her appreciation for beautiful craftsmanship. "Cassandra," my mother hissed from across the table, "please stop her from doing that. The Pembertons are watching." The Pembertons were longtime family friends whose opinion my parents valued highly. I watched as my mother's face flushed with embarrassment, as if Juniper's innocent behavior was somehow reflecting poorly on the entire family's reputation. "She's not hurting anything," I replied quietly, placing a protective hand on Juniper's shoulder. "She's just appreciating the beautiful pattern." "It's not appropriate," my father interjected, his voice carrying the authority he'd used when disciplining me as a child. "She needs to learn proper behavior in social situations." The message was clear: Juniper's natural behaviors, the very traits that made her uniquely herself, were seen as defects that needed to be corrected or hidden. The unconditional acceptance and celebration that Jasper and Julian received was never extended to my daughter. The educational disparity became even more apparent when it came time for special programs and opportunities. When Julian showed an aptitude for mathematics, my parents immediately enrolled him in an advanced summer program at Thornfield University, the same prestigious institution where Nathaniel had earned his MBA. The program cost $3,000 for 2 weeks, but they paid without hesitation and even bought him specialized equipment and textbooks. When Juniper's teacher mentioned that she had shown exceptional artistic ability and recommended a specialized summer camp for children with autism who demonstrated creative talents, my parents' response was dramatically different. 3 weeks seems like a long time, my mother mused when I mentioned the program. And quite expensive for what amounts to summer daycare. The program wasn't daycare. It was a carefully designed therapeutic and educational experience that combined artistic expression with social skills development and sensory integration therapy. It was exactly what Juniper needed to build confidence and develop her natural talents. But unlike Julian's academic enrichment, which was immediately recognized as a valuable investment, Juniper's program was dismissed as an unnecessary expense. I ended up working extra hours for months, taking on additional freelance projects and selling some of my own art pieces to afford the tuition. Watching Juniper flourish in that environment, seeing her confidence grow as she worked alongside other children who understood her perspective, made every sacrifice worthwhile. But it also highlighted how different her path would be without the financial support that her cousins took for granted. The pattern was consistent across every aspect of their childhood experiences. Quality healthcare, educational opportunities, extracurricular activities, family vacations. The twins received the best of everything while Juniper's needs were treated as optional extras that I should manage on my own. This systematic exclusion and devaluation of my daughter wasn't just about money or convenience. It was about fundamental acceptance and love. My parents had created a hierarchy within our family where some grandchildren were worthy of investment and pride while others were burdens to be tolerated. As Christmas approached and the annual family dynamics played out once again, I had no idea that this year would finally force a reckoning with the truth we'd all been avoiding. The grinding years of building my freelance graphic design business while raising Juniper alone tested every ounce of strength I possessed. While my brother Nathaniel climbed the corporate ladder at Meridian Financial Group with the safety net of our parents' connections and financial support, I was working 18-hour days from our small cottage, trying to establish myself in Millbrook Harbor's competitive creative market. My workspace was a converted bedroom where I'd set up 2 monitors, a professional scanner, and enough coffee-making equipment to fuel a small army. The walls were covered with color swatches, client mood boards, and Juniper's artwork, her drawings providing more inspiration than any expensive design book ever could. During her school hours, I would dive deep into projects, crafting logos for local businesses, designing marketing materials for startups, and building websites for anyone willing to give an unknown designer a chance. The financial pressure was relentless. Every month brought a careful calculation of which bills could be paid immediately and which could be delayed without serious consequences. I became an expert at stretching grocery budgets, finding free activities for Juniper, and making our modest cottage feel warm and inviting despite the secondhand furniture and hand-me-down decorations. While I was learning to negotiate with clients who wanted premium design work at bargain prices, Nathaniel was being groomed for partnership at his firm. Our parents regularly discussed his professional achievements during family gatherings, detailing his latest client acquisitions and the expensive business trips that were expanding his industry connections. They spoke with such pride about his corner office, his company car, and the exclusive networking events he attended. Nathaniel just closed a deal with the Harrington Development Group, my father would announce during Sunday dinners, his chest swelling with pride. 7 figures in managed assets. The youngest executive in the firm's history to land an account that size. When conversation turned to my work, which happened rarely, the tone shifted to polite curiosity mixed with barely concealed concern about my unconventional career choice. "How's the computer work going?" my mother would ask, as if graphic design was somehow equivalent to playing video games. I tried to share my victories, landing my first major client, having my work featured in a regional business magazine, or completing a particularly challenging branding project that tripled a startup's customer engagement. But these accomplishments were met with the kind of patronizing encouragement typically reserved for children's art projects. "That's nice, dear," my mother would respond before immediately shifting attention back to whatever achievement Jasper or Julian had recently accomplished at their expensive private school. The isolation was perhaps the most difficult aspect of those grinding years. Other parents at Juniper's school events arrived in groups, chatting easily about playdates and social gatherings while I stood on the periphery, too exhausted from work deadlines to invest in building adult friendships. Most of my peers from college had moved away from Millbrook Harbor or settled into traditional family structures that felt increasingly foreign to my reality. During this period, Juniper's needs were becoming more complex as she grew older. Speech therapy appointments, occupational therapy sessions, and specialized tutoring to help her succeed in mainstream educational settings required constant coordination and advocacy. I became fluent in the language of individualized education plans, insurance appeals, and therapeutic interventions. Each appointment meant lost work hours and reduced income, but seeing Juniper's progress made every sacrifice worthwhile. She was developing her own unique voice, expressing herself through art and movement in ways that amazed her therapists. Her creativity was boundless. She could spend hours creating intricate drawings of imaginary worlds, complete with detailed backstories and character relationships that demonstrated remarkable narrative sophistication. But my parents remained largely disconnected from these developments. When I would excitedly share news about Juniper's therapeutic breakthroughs or artistic achievements, they would listen politely but without the genuine enthusiasm they showed for every mundane accomplishment of the twins. "That's wonderful that she's making progress," my mother would say in the same tone she used when commenting on the weather, before launching into detailed descriptions of Jasper's latest soccer trophy or Julian's academic honors. The contrast became even more stark during family celebrations. While Jasper and Julian received elaborate birthday parties with professional entertainment, custom decorations, and guest lists that included half of Millbrook Harbor's social elite, Juniper's birthdays were intimate affairs that I organized on my limited budget. I would transform our little cottage into magical wonderlands themed around her current interests: butterfly gardens, underwater kingdoms, or outer space adventures. I spent weeks creating handmade decorations, researching activities that would engage her sensory preferences, and planning experiences that celebrated her unique perspective on the world. These celebrations were filled with joy and creativity, but they highlighted the resource disparity that defined our family dynamics. While the twins' parties featured hired magicians and catered meals, Juniper's celebrations showcased homemade crafts and potluck contributions from the few friends I'd managed to cultivate despite my demanding schedule. My parents would attend Juniper's parties, but their discomfort was palpable. They would arrive late, leave early, and spend most of their time checking their phones or making polite conversation with other guests rather than engaging with the celebration itself. During one particularly memorable birthday party, Juniper's 4th, which I'd themed around her obsession with marine life, I watched my parents sit stiffly on our second-hand couch while Juniper excitedly showed them an elaborate underwater scene she'd created from recycled materials. Their response was a brief, very creative, before turning their attention to text messages from Nathaniel about the twins' upcoming tennis tournament. The professional isolation was equally challenging. While Nathaniel networked at exclusive business events and golf tournaments that our parents facilitated through their social connections, I was building my client base one small project at a time. I attended every Chamber of Commerce meeting, volunteered my services for local nonprofits, and slowly built a reputation for reliable, creative work that exceeded expectations. Late nights became my specialty, those quiet hours after Juniper fell asleep when I could focus intensively on complex design challenges without interruption. I taught myself advanced software programs through online tutorials, studied current design trends during my lunch breaks, and constantly pushed myself to deliver work that competed with larger agencies despite my one-person operation. The breakthrough moment came during Juniper's 5th year when I landed a contract with Coastal Properties, Millbrook Harbor's largest real estate development firm. They needed a complete rebranding package, logo design, marketing materials, website development, and signage for their newest luxury waterfront project. The contract was worth more than I'd earned in the previous 6 months combined. Working on that project required everything I'd learned during those grinding years of small jobs and difficult clients. I poured my heart into creating a brand identity that captured the sophisticated elegance of waterfront living while remaining accessible to a broader market. The final presentation included dozens of mock-ups, detailed implementation strategies, and creative applications that demonstrated how the new brand could evolve with the company's growth. When Coastal Properties not only accepted my proposal but recommended my services to 3 other major clients, I felt a surge of validation that had been absent from my professional life for years. Finally, I had proof that my unconventional path was leading somewhere meaningful. But even this significant professional victory was met with lukewarm responses from my family. While my parents celebrated every minor advancement in Nathaniel's corporate career with dinner parties and congratulatory phone calls, my biggest professional breakthrough was acknowledged with a distracted, "That's nice," during a brief phone conversation primarily focused on planning the twins' upcoming 8th birthday celebration. Those grinding years taught me self-reliance in ways I'd never anticipated, but they also revealed the true depths of my family's conditional love and support. The breakthrough that transformed my struggling design business into something substantial came unexpectedly during the autumn of Juniper's 6th year. What started as a routine project consultation at Meridian Bay Resort turned into the opportunity that would reshape our entire financial landscape and professional trajectory. I had been contacted by the resort's marketing director, Vivian Cross, who needed a complete visual rebrand for their upcoming season. Meridian Bay was Millbrook Harbor's premier luxury destination, attracting wealthy tourists from across the region with its pristine beaches, world-class spa facilities, and exclusive dining experiences. The existing brand identity felt outdated and failed to capture the sophisticated elegance that justified their premium pricing. During our initial meeting in the resort's stunning oceanfront conference room, Vivian outlined a project scope that dwarfed anything I had previously handled. They needed everything: logo redesign, complete stationery package, website overhaul, promotional materials, signage for 37 different locations throughout the property, staff uniforms coordination, and marketing campaigns for print and digital platforms. "We've been working with a large agency from Thornfield City," Vivian explained, referring to the metropolitan area 2 hours inland from Millbrook Harbor. "But their designs feel generic, like they could represent any resort anywhere. We want something that captures the unique essence of our location and clientele." The project timeline was aggressive: 12 weeks to complete everything for their spring season launch. Most established agencies would require a team of 6 to 8 designers to meet such demanding deadlines. As a solo operation, taking on this project meant risking everything if I couldn't deliver, but the potential rewards were extraordinary. I spent 3 sleepless nights developing concepts that would showcase my vision for their rebrand. Drawing inspiration from the natural beauty surrounding Millbrook Harbor, the way morning light danced across the water, the elegant curves of driftwood sculpted by endless tides, the sophisticated color palette of sunset reflecting off weathered pier posts, I created a brand identity that felt both timeless and contemporary. The presentation materials I prepared were more comprehensive than anything I had previously produced. I designed mock-ups showing how the new brand would look across every possible application, from business cards to billboard advertisements, from website interfaces to spa treatment menus. I even created detailed style guides that would ensure consistent implementation across all resort communications. When I presented the concepts to Vivian and her executive team, the response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. The new logo, an abstract interpretation of ocean waves forming an elegant monogram, captured exactly what they had been seeking. The color palette, inspired by the natural environment but sophisticated enough for luxury marketing, created the perfect balance between accessible and exclusive. "This is exactly what we envisioned," Vivian said, studying the presentation materials with obvious excitement. "You've somehow captured everything we love about this place and made it feel fresh and contemporary." The contract they offered was worth more than my previous 3 years of combined income. It included a substantial upfront payment, milestone payments throughout the project timeline, and performance bonuses based on successful implementation. Additionally, they requested an exclusive ongoing relationship for all future design needs, essentially guaranteeing steady income for years to come. Working on the Meridian Bay project required me to operate at a level of professionalism and creativity I had never before sustained. Every day brought new challenges: coordinating with printers who specialized in luxury finishes, collaborating with web developers to ensure seamless user experiences, managing timelines that demanded perfection within impossible deadlines. Juniper, now more independent and thriving in her therapeutic programs, understood that Mommy was working on something special. She would quietly play in my office while I worked late into the night, occasionally offering suggestions about colors or asking thoughtful questions about why certain design choices worked better than others. "Why did you make the letters curvy instead of straight?" she asked one evening, studying the logo development process displayed across my monitors. "Because the ocean moves in curves," I explained, "and this resort is all about feeling like you're part of the ocean's rhythm." Her artistic eye, already remarkably sophisticated for her age, often provided insights that helped me refine my approach. During one particularly challenging phase of the website design, she suggested incorporating subtle animations that mimicked the movement of water, an idea that became one of the project's most praised features. The success of the Meridian Bay rebrand created ripple effects throughout Millbrook Harbor's business community. Word spread quickly about the local designer who had transformed the area's most prestigious resort, and inquiries began arriving from other high-end establishments wanting similar transformations. Within 6 months of completing the resort project, I had landed contracts with Harbor Heights Country Club, Crescent Hill Galleries, and Millbrook Harbor Bank, 3 of the most established and respected businesses in our community. Each project built upon the previous one, allowing me to develop increasingly sophisticated design solutions and command higher rates for my expertise. The financial transformation was dramatic. For the first time since Juniper's birth, I wasn't calculating which bills could be delayed or searching couch cushions for grocery money. I was able to move us from our cramped cottage to a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in the historic Ocean View district, complete with dedicated office space and an art studio where Juniper could explore her creativity without space constraints. More importantly, I could finally provide Juniper with the same quality of opportunities that Jasper and Julian had always taken for granted. I enrolled her in the prestigious Millbrook Academy for Creative Arts, a specialized program that combined traditional academics with intensive artistic development and autism-friendly learning environments. The tuition was significant, but seeing her excitement about attending school each day made every dollar worthwhile. I also hired Rebecca Martinez, a wonderful developmental specialist who began working with Juniper twice weekly on social skills, communication strategies, and executive functioning. Rebecca's approach was remarkable. She helped Juniper understand her unique neurological wiring as a superpower rather than a limitation, building confidence while developing practical life skills. The professional recognition that accompanied my business success felt almost surreal after years of struggling for credibility. The Millbrook Harbor Business Association invited me to join their executive board. The regional design community began requesting me as a speaker at conferences and workshops. Industry publications featured my work in articles about innovative branding strategies for hospitality businesses. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of my professional breakthrough was the creative fulfillment it provided. After years of compromising my artistic vision to meet tight budgets and conservative client expectations, I was finally working with businesses that valued innovative design and were willing to invest in creative excellence. Each project became an opportunity to push creative boundaries while solving complex marketing challenges. I developed signature approaches to brand storytelling that helped businesses connect emotionally with their target audiences. My portfolio evolved into a cohesive body of work that demonstrated both artistic sophistication and commercial effectiveness. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my parents continued to dismiss my career as computer work, I was building something more substantial and creatively fulfilling than many traditional corporate positions. My client relationships were based on mutual respect and shared creative vision rather than office politics and arbitrary hierarchies. During this period of professional growth, family gatherings became even more painful as the contrast between my actual success and my parents' perception of my life became increasingly stark. They continued to treat my thriving business as a hobby while celebrating every minor advancement in Nathaniel's corporate career with disproportionate enthusiasm. What they didn't understand was that I was building something lasting and meaningful, not just financially, but creatively and personally. Success had allowed me to provide Juniper with opportunities one had only dreamed about during those grinding early years, setting the stage for the Christmas confrontation that would finally force our family to acknowledge the truth about our respective lives. Despite my flourishing design business and Juniper's remarkable progress in her specialized programs, my family's dismissive attitude toward our accomplishments remained unchanged. The success that had transformed our daily lives into something stable and fulfilling was invisible to my parents, who continued to view my career as a temporary phase and Juniper's needs as inconvenient complications to their carefully curated family image. During family gatherings throughout that year, the pattern of selective attention became even more pronounced. My parents would spend considerable time discussing Nathaniel's latest corporate achievements, his promotion to senior vice president, the luxury sedan provided by his company, or the exclusive vacation packages he received as performance bonuses. These conversations were detailed and enthusiastic, with my parents clearly relishing every aspect of their son's conventional success. When the rare opportunity arose to mention my work, their responses remained frustratingly superficial. "Still doing the computer graphics?" my father would ask, as if my professional design consultancy was equivalent to casual photo editing. Even when I mentioned landing major contracts or receiving industry recognition, their attention would quickly drift to more pressing concerns about the twins' academic schedules or Nathaniel's social calendar. The financial disparity in how they treated their grandchildren became even more stark as my own circumstances improved. Despite my increased income and ability to provide quality opportunities for Juniper, my parents continued to shower the twins with expensive gifts while treating my daughter's accomplishments as minor footnotes in family conversations. When Jasper and Julian completed their first year at Ashworth Preparatory Academy with acceptable grades, not exceptional, simply meeting basic expectations, my parents organized an elaborate celebration dinner at Millbrook Harbor's most exclusive restaurant, Chateau Meridian. The evening included extended family members, family friends, and even some of Nathaniel's business associates. Professional photographs were taken, and my mother spent weeks afterwards showing the pictures to anyone willing to look. That same month, Juniper completed her first semester at Millbrook Academy for Creative Arts with outstanding evaluations from every instructor. Her teachers reported that her artistic abilities were developing at an extraordinary pace, her social skills were improving dramatically, and her confidence had grown remarkably since starting the program. She had even been selected to participate in a regional art exhibition showcasing work by young artists with exceptional potential. My parents' response to this news was a brief, "That's nice," during a phone conversation primarily focused on planning the twins' upcoming spring break trip to Tuscany, a graduation gift for completing third grade successfully. The social exclusions during this period were perhaps the most painful aspect of our family dynamics. My parents had become increasingly involved in Millbrook Harbor's elite social circles, hosting elaborate dinner parties and charity fundraisers that showcased their status within the community. These events featured carefully selected guest lists that included the town's most influential families, successful business leaders, and prominent cultural figures. Nathaniel, Penelope, and the twins were always prominently featured at these gatherings. Jasper and Julian would be dressed in matching outfits and coached to perform for the adult guests, reciting poetry, demonstrating their musical abilities, or engaging in conversations that highlighted their academic achievements. My parents would beam with pride as guests complimented their grandson's poise and intelligence. Juniper and I were rarely invited to these events, and when we were included, it felt more like a reluctant obligation than a genuine welcome. The few times we attended, I watched my parents manage the situation with obvious discomfort, steering conversations away from topics related to Juniper's autism or my unconventional career path. During one particularly memorable charity gala supporting the Millbrook Harbor Arts Foundation, an event where my professional expertise and Juniper's artistic talents should have been celebration-worthy, my parents introduced me to their friends as our daughter who does some design work, while spending 20 minutes describing Nathaniel's latest business deal with a prominent real estate development firm. The irony was particularly bitter since I had actually donated professional design services to several organizations represented at the gala, and my work was displayed throughout the venue on promotional materials and auction catalogs. But my parents seemed oblivious to these contributions, focusing instead on achievements that fit their narrow definition of success. Throughout this period, I maintained professional relationships with several families in my parents' social circle through my design work, creating interesting situations where clients would praise my creativity and professionalism while my own parents downplayed my career accomplishments during the same conversations. Cassandra created our entire brand identity, Vivian Cross mentioned to my mother during one charity event. The Meridian Bay rebrand has been phenomenally successful. Reservations are up 40% since implementing her design strategy. My mother's response was polite but dismissive, "She's always been creative. We're just proud that she's found a way to make some money from her hobbies." The characterization of my professional consultancy as a hobby was particularly galling given that my annual income now exceeded Nathaniel's corporate salary, but correcting this misperception would have required my parents to acknowledge information they seemed determined to ignore. Even more frustrating was their continued inability to recognize Juniper's exceptional qualities and growing achievements. Her artistic development had reached remarkable levels for her age, with instructors regularly commenting on her unique perspective and technical abilities. She was developing friendships with other children in her program, communicating more effectively in various social situations, and demonstrating problem-solving skills that amazed her therapists. But my parents remained focused on deficits rather than strengths, viewing her autism through a lens of limitation rather than recognizing the remarkable capabilities that accompanied her different neurological wiring. When she would create elaborate drawings of imaginary worlds or demonstrate her encyclopedic knowledge of marine biology, their responses lacked the genuine enthusiasm they showed for the twins' more conventional accomplishments. During one family dinner, Juniper excitedly shared detailed information about octopus intelligence that she had learned during a marine biology unit at school. Her knowledge was sophisticated and delivered with infectious enthusiasm, demonstrating both her research abilities and passionate curiosity about the natural world. "That's educational," my father responded before immediately shifting conversation to Julian's upcoming tennis tournament, as if my daughter's intellectual curiosity was somehow less valuable than athletic participation. The pattern of selective celebration continued throughout the year, creating an environment where Juniper began to internalize messages about her relative worth within the family hierarchy. I watched her natural exuberance diminish during family gatherings as she realized that her excitement about personal achievements would never receive the same validation that her cousins enjoyed for far lesser accomplishments. This ongoing dismissal of both my professional success and Juniper's remarkable development was creating emotional distance between my parents and us that grew wider each month. While I had initially hoped that my business success would earn their respect and Juniper's progress would win their genuine affection, it became clear that their ability to recognize our worth was limited by their rigid expectations about what constituted acceptable achievement within our family structure. As Christmas approached and another year of family traditions loomed ahead, I had no idea that this holiday season would finally force a confrontation with the systematic exclusion and favoritism that had defined our relationships for years. The painful discovery awaiting me would shatter any remaining illusions about my parents' capacity for equal love and acceptance. The catalyst that would finally expose the full extent of my parents' favoritism came during the third week of December, when Christmas preparations were in full swing throughout Millbrook Harbor. The elaborate holiday traditions that had once brought our family together had evolved into carefully orchestrated events that seemed designed more to showcase social status than celebrate genuine family bonds. My mother had been planning this year's Christmas celebration for months, treating it like a high-stakes social event rather than an intimate family gathering. She had hired professional decorators to transform their Elmwood Avenue mansion into a winter wonderland, complete with a 12-foot Fraser fir Christmas tree adorned with expensive ornaments collected during their European travels. The dining room table was set with her grandmother's Spode china, Waterford crystal, and sterling silver that only appeared during the most important occasions. The guest list for Christmas Eve dinner had grown to include not just immediate family, but also the Ashfords, the Cromwells, and several other prominent Millbrook Harbor families whose approval my parents actively cultivated. This expansion of the celebration from a family gathering into a social showcase created additional pressure for everything to appear perfect according to their exacting standards. 3 weeks before Christmas, my mother called to discuss the arrangements with unusual formality in her voice. "Cassandra, dear, I wanted to speak with you about this year's Christmas celebration," she began, her tone already setting me on edge. "Of course, Mom. What time would you like Juniper and me to arrive?" I responded, assuming this would be a routine conversation about timing and perhaps what dish I could contribute to the meal. There was a lengthy pause that stretched uncomfortably before she continued. "Well, that's precisely what I wanted to discuss with you. This year's gathering is quite significant for our family's standing in the community. The Ashfords are bringing their son Marcus, who's considering Nathaniel for a partnership position at Cromwell, Ashford and Associates." Cromwell, Ashford and Associates was Millbrook Harbor's most prestigious law firm, and a partnership that would represent the pinnacle of professional achievement for Nathaniel. I could already sense where this conversation was heading, but I remained silent, hoping my suspicions were wrong. "The Cromwells will also be attending, along with several other important families," my mother continued. "Everything needs to be absolutely perfect. You understand how crucial first impressions are in situations like this." "I'm sure everything will be lovely, Mom. You always create beautiful holiday celebrations." I tried to keep my voice neutral, though my stomach was beginning to tighten with dread. "Yes, well, that's why I wanted to discuss Juniper's participation in this year's festivities." The careful way she pronounced my daughter's name made it clear that she viewed Juniper as a problem to be managed rather than a beloved granddaughter to be celebrated. "What about Juniper's participation?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would break my heart. You know how she can become overwhelmed in social situations. The stemming, the repetitive questions, the way she sometimes has difficulty regulating her emotional responses when there are too many people or too much sensory input. My mother's voice carried the clinical detachment of someone describing symptoms rather than discussing her grandchild's natural behaviors. She's made tremendous progress in social situations, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. Her therapists have been working with her on coping strategies, and she's much more comfortable in group settings now. Perhaps, but this particular evening is simply too important to risk any disruptions. The Ashfords have very traditional expectations about children's behavior, and we cannot afford to make an unfavorable impression. The word disruptions hit me like a physical blow. My mother was describing my 6-year-old daughter's autism-related behaviors as disruptions that could derail my brother's career prospects. The implication was clear: Juniper's natural neurological differences were somehow shameful enough to threaten the family's social standing. "Are you uninviting my daughter from Christmas?" I asked directly, needing to hear the words spoken clearly. "I'm suggesting that perhaps this year it would be better for everyone if you celebrated Christmas separately with Juniper. Somewhere she can be more comfortable and free to behave naturally without the pressure of formal social expectations." The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the brutal reality of what she was proposing. My 6-year-old daughter was being banned from Christmas because my parents were ashamed of her autism and worried that her presence might embarrass them in front of their social circle. "Mom, she's 6 years old. She's your granddaughter. This is Christmas we're talking about." My voice was rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "Please don't be dramatic, Cassandra. It's just one Christmas. There will be many others when the circumstances are more suitable for her needs." But I knew better. This wasn't about one Christmas. This was about my parents establishing a precedent that Juniper would be excluded from family gatherings whenever her autism might inconvenience their social aspirations. If they could justify banning her from Christmas, what other family milestones would become off-limits? "What about Jasper and Julian?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Will they be attending?" "Of course," my mother replied without hesitation. "They're looking forward to it tremendously. Penelope bought them matching navy blazers for the occasion. They'll be perfect little gentlemen." The contrast was devastating. While my daughter was being excluded for behaviors beyond her control, her cousins were being celebrated and showcased as evidence of the family's success and respectability. "I need to think about this," I said, though my mind was already reeling with the implications of their decision. "I hope you'll understand that this decision wasn't made lightly," my mother concluded with false sympathy. "We're simply trying to do what's best for everyone involved." After hanging up, I sat in my office staring at the framed photo of Juniper on my desk, a picture from a recent art exhibition where she was beaming with pride next to her butterfly painting. The joy in her expression made my mother's words even more painful. How could anyone look at this brilliant, creative, loving child and see only potential embarrassment? That evening, when Juniper asked about Christmas plans at Grandmama and Grandpapa's house, I had to find a way to explain the inexplicable without breaking her spirit. The conversation broke my heart, but it also crystallized my resolve. I would not allow my parents to make my daughter feel unwanted or ashamed of who she was. What I discovered on Christmas Eve would prove that their exclusion of Juniper was even more cruel and calculating than I had imagined, setting the stage for a confrontation that would finally expose the true depths of their favoritism and force our family to confront uncomfortable truths about love, acceptance, and what it truly means to be family. The weeks following my mother's devastating phone call were filled with careful planning as I tried to create a meaningful Christmas experience for Juniper while grappling with the pain of our exclusion. I had decided that we would spend Christmas Eve at home, creating our own traditions that celebrated everything wonderful about my daughter without the stress of family judgment or social performance. I threw myself into preparations that would make Christmas magical for Juniper, designing activities around her interests and sensory preferences. We planned to make homemade pizza with her favorite toppings, watch classic holiday movies while wrapped in soft blankets, and create art projects inspired by winter themes. I had purchased supplies for her to design her own wrapping paper, knowing how much she enjoyed the tactile experience of painting and the satisfaction of creating something uniquely her own. The cottage was decorated with care, but not extravagance. Juniper had helped create paper snowflakes with intricate patterns that demonstrated her remarkable attention to detail and spatial reasoning. We strung popcorn and cranberries while listening to gentle holiday music that wouldn't overwhelm her auditory sensitivities. Every decoration had been chosen or created with her participation, making our space feel warm and authentically celebratory. On Christmas Eve afternoon, I realized I had forgotten to pick up Juniper's seizure medication from the pharmacy before they closed for the holiday. She had been seizure-free for 8 months, but maintaining consistent medication levels was crucial for her neurological stability. The prescription couldn't wait until after Christmas, and the only pharmacy open for emergency prescriptions was located near my parents' neighborhood on Elmwood Avenue. "Juniper, we need to make a quick stop to pick up your medicine," I explained as we bundled into winter coats for the short drive across town. "Can we drive past Grandmama's house to see their Christmas lights?" she asked hopefully. Despite everything, she still maintained an innocent affection for her grandparents and beautiful memories of previous holiday celebrations before their attitudes had hardened. My heart ached at her request, but I couldn't deny her simple pleasure in holiday decorations. "We can drive past quickly," I agreed, planning to keep the visit brief to avoid any potential confrontation or painful reminders of our exclusion. The pharmacy visit was efficient, and soon we were driving through the elegant streets of Crescent Hill toward Elmwood Avenue. The neighborhood was spectacular during the holidays, with each mansion trying to outdo its neighbors in elaborate lighting displays and seasonal decorations. Juniper pressed her face to the window, marveling at the winter wonderlands that transformed ordinary homes into magical scenes. As we approached my parents' house, I could see that their professional decorators had created something truly stunning. The entire facade was outlined in warm white lights, the massive oak trees in their front yard were wrapped in twinkling strands, and elegant wreaths adorned every window. Their circular driveway was lined with luminaria that created a welcoming pathway to the front entrance. But as we drew closer, I noticed something that made me slam on the brake so hard that our seatbelts engaged with a sharp click. Through the large front windows of my parents' living room, clearly visible from the street, was a scene that shattered every remaining piece of trust one had in my family's capacity for honesty and fairness. The living room was filled with wrapped presents arranged in elaborate displays around the base of their enormous Christmas tree. But the distribution was so obviously unequal that even from our position in the street, the favoritism was unmistakable and heartbreaking. On the left side of the tree, in prime position where they would be most visible to anyone entering the room, were 2 massive piles of gifts. The packages were professionally wrapped in coordinating gold and burgundy paper with elaborate ribbon treatments that clearly indicated expensive contents. These weren't modest family gifts, they were the kind of extravagant displays typically seen in luxury store windows or wealthy households showcasing their prosperity. Each pile contained at least 15 to 20 packages of various sizes, from large boxes that could contain electronics or sporting equipment to smaller jewelry-sized packages that suggested thoughtful, expensive selections. Gift tags in elegant calligraphy identified these treasures as belonging to Jasper and Julian. On the right side of the tree, in a less prominent position that would be partially hidden by furniture placement, sat a dramatically smaller collection of packages. 3 modestly wrapped gifts with simple ribbon and obviously generic wrapping paper that suggested last-minute shopping at convenience stores rather than careful selection and professional presentation. The gift tags on these packages bore Juniper's name. 3 gifts. 3 small, obviously inexpensive gifts for the granddaughter they had banned from Christmas because her presence might embarrass them in front of their social circle. "Mommy, why are Jasper and Julian's presents so much bigger than mine?" Juniper asked quietly, her perceptive eyes taking in the stark inequality displayed so prominently in her grandparents' front window. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white as rage and heartbreak warred for dominance in my chest. This wasn't just about Christmas morning inequality. This was about my parents' deliberate choice to exclude Juniper while simultaneously demonstrating through their gift-giving exactly how little they valued her compared to her cousins. They had banned her from Christmas, claiming it was for everyone's comfort and to avoid social embarrassment. But they had still purchased gifts for her, token acknowledgments that revealed how perfunctory their love truly was. 3 small packages that would be presented to her at some later, less convenient time, when her presence wouldn't interfere with their important social obligations. The cruelty was breathtaking in its calculated precision. They wanted to maintain the appearance of being loving grandparents without actually including her in their celebration or treating her as an equally valued family member. "Those presents are for later, sweetheart," I managed to say through the tightness in my throat. Different families celebrate in different ways. But Juniper wasn't fooled by my careful explanation. At 6 years old, she possessed an emotional intelligence that allowed her to recognize rejection even when adults tried to disguise it with polite explanations and social conventions. "They don't want me there for Christmas," she said matter-of-factly, her voice carrying a sadness that no child should ever have to express about their grandparents. "Some people have trouble understanding how special you are," I replied, pulling away from the curb before my anger could overwhelm my judgment. "But that's their loss, not yours." As we drove home through the holiday-lit streets of Millbrook Harbor, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of our family relationships forever. This Christmas Eve discovery had revealed the true depths of my parents' favoritism and the calculated nature of their exclusion. They hadn't simply uninvited us from Christmas, they had created a deliberate display of inequality that would wound any child who witnessed it. The confrontation that was coming would force them to account for this cruelty and finally acknowledge the damage their favoritism had inflicted on an innocent child who deserved nothing but love and acceptance from her grandparents. The morning after our devastating discovery at my parents' house, I woke with a clarity of purpose that had been absent from my life for years. Juniper was still sleeping peacefully in her bed, surrounded by the handmade decorations we had created together, but I knew that our quiet Christmas at home would have to wait. The image of those unequal gift piles was burned into my memory, and I realized that confronting this injustice could no longer be postponed. I had spent the night oscillating between fury and heartbreak, replaying every moment of favoritism I had witnessed over the years and recognizing patterns I had previously minimized or excused. This wasn't simply about different parenting styles or generational misunderstandings. This was systematic emotional abuse of a child whose only crime was being born different from her cousin's neurotypical development. After ensuring that Juniper was comfortable with our neighbor Mrs. Chen watching her for a few hours, an arrangement she enjoyed because Mrs. Chen appreciated her artistic projects and never made her feel self-conscious about her autism-related behaviors, I drove back to Elmwood Avenue with a determination that surprised me with its intensity. The Christmas morning scene at my parents' house was exactly what I had expected to find. Through the same front windows that had revealed their gift inequality the night before, I could see the family gathered in the living room for present opening. The expensive wrapping paper from Jasper and Julian's substantial gift hauls was scattered across the Persian rug while the boys excitedly displayed their new acquisitions to the assembled adults. Nathaniel and Penelope were dressed in coordinated holiday outfits that spoke of careful planning and significant expense. My parents were beaming with pride as they watched their grandsons unwrap items that clearly represented considerable thought and financial investment: a professional-grade art easel for Julian, high-end sports equipment for Jasper, and electronics that would have strained my budget just months earlier. The contrast with Juniper's modest gift pile was even more stark in the bright morning light. Her 3 small packages remained unopened beneath the tree, forgotten in the excitement of the boys' celebration. No one seemed to notice or care that she wasn't there to receive whatever token acknowledgement those packages contained. I knocked on the front door with more force than strictly necessary, my anger giving me courage I hadn't possessed during previous family confrontations. When my father opened the door, his expression immediately shifted from holiday cheer to obvious displeasure at my unexpected arrival. "Cassandra, what are you doing here?" he asked without any pretense of seasonal warmth. "We discussed this. Today isn't appropriate for your visit." "I'm here about Juniper's Christmas presents," I replied, pushing past him into the foyer before he could close the door. "The ones I saw through your front window last night." My mother appeared from the living room, her face flushed with embarrassment at having been caught in their deception. "You were spying on us?" "I was picking up Juniper's medication from the pharmacy," I explained, my voice carrying an edge that commanded attention. "We drove past your house, and she saw her 3 little presents next to her cousin's mountains of expensive gifts. She asked me why theirs were so much bigger than hers." The silence that followed was deafening. Nathaniel and Penelope had emerged from the living room, curiosity evident in their expressions, while Jasper and Julian peered around the corner with the wide-eyed attention of children sensing adult conflict. "Those gifts are perfectly appropriate," my mother said defensively, but her voice lacked conviction. We always give thoughtful presents to all of our grandchildren. Thoughtful? I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain controlled. You banned my 6-year-old daughter from Christmas because you were ashamed of her autism, but you still bought her 3 token gifts that you probably picked up at the last minute to assuage your guilt. My father's face reddened with anger and embarrassment. Lower your voice. The neighbors will hear you. Let them hear, I replied without hesitation. Let everyone in this neighborhood know exactly how you treat your granddaughter who has autism. Let them know that you're so ashamed of her differences that you excluded her from Christmas morning. Penelope looked genuinely shocked. You excluded Juniper from Christmas? Why would you do that? My mother scrambled to control the narrative. It wasn't exclusion. It was consideration for her special needs. Large gatherings can be overwhelming for children like her. Children like her? I repeated, my anger reaching dangerous levels. She's not children like her. She's Juniper. She's your granddaughter. And large gatherings aren't overwhelming when they're filled with people who love and accept her. Nathaniel finally spoke, his voice cautious. I didn't know she wasn't invited. I assumed you were celebrating separately by choice. Of course you didn't know, I said, turning to face my brother directly. Because knowing might have required you to question why your children receive elaborate celebrations while mine gets banned from family gatherings. The gift inequality was impossible to ignore as we stood in the doorway of the living room. Jasper and Julian's expensive presents were displayed prominently, while Juniper's modest packages sat forgotten beneath the tree like afterthoughts. Look at those gifts, I said, gesturing toward the obvious disparity. Count them. Compare them. Tell me that represents equal love and treatment. My mother's defense crumbled under the visual evidence. We've always been generous with all of the children. Generous? I laughed bitterly. You spent more on Julian's art easel than you've spent on Juniper's gifts in her entire lifetime. You enrolled Jasper and Julian in private school while suggesting Juniper should be grateful for public education. You celebrate every minor achievement of the twins while dismissing my daughter's remarkable progress as unimportant. The truth was finally being spoken aloud, and the discomfort in the room was palpable. Years of polite fiction were being stripped away to reveal the ugly reality of systematic favoritism that had damaged relationships and wounded an innocent child. This ends today, I declared with finality that surprised everyone, including myself. Either you acknowledge what you've done and commit to treating all of your grandchildren with equal love and respect, or Juniper and I are done pretending to be part of this family. The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge that would reshape our family dynamics forever. For the first time in my adult life, I had refused to accept their treatment and demanded better for my daughter and myself. The confrontation that followed would force everyone to choose between comfortable lies and painful truths, setting the stage for either genuine healing or permanent estrangement from the people who had failed to love my daughter as she deserved to be loved. The immediate aftermath of my ultimatum created a tension so thick it seemed to physically press against everyone in the elegantly decorated foyer. My parents stood frozen, clearly unprepared for this level of direct confrontation about their treatment of Juniper. For years, they had operated under the assumption that their favoritism would remain politely unacknowledged, a family secret that everyone would tacitly agree to ignore for the sake of maintaining superficial harmony. Nathaniel was the first to break the silence, his corporate training in conflict management apparently kicking in. Let's all take a deep breath and discuss this calmly, he said, using the measured tone he probably employed during difficult client negotiations. There's nothing to discuss calmly, I replied, my voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside me. This isn't a business dispute that can be resolved through compromise. This is about a 6-year-old girl who has been systematically excluded and devalued by her own grandparents. My father, who had remained silent during the initial confrontation, finally found his voice. You're being unnecessarily dramatic, Cassandra. We've always treated all of the children fairly. Fairly? I gestured again toward the living room where the evidence of their favoritism was displayed in stark relief. Jasper and Julian received at least 20 gifts each this morning. Juniper got 3 small packages that she wasn't even here to open because you banned her from Christmas. Penelope, who had been observing the exchange with growing discomfort, spoke up hesitantly. I didn't realize the gift distribution was so uneven. Perhaps we could adjust things for next year? Next year? I repeated incredulously. You think this is about gift equality? This is about fundamental respect and acceptance. Your children are celebrated for existing while my daughter is treated like an embarrassment to be hidden from polite society. My mother attempted to regain control of the narrative. Juniper has special needs that require different considerations. We've always tried to be sensitive to her limitations. Her limitations? The words came out louder than I intended, causing Jasper and Julian to retreat further into the living room. She's not limited. She's autistic. She experiences the world differently, and that difference makes her remarkable, not defective. We never said she was defective, my father protested, but his tone lacked conviction. You didn't have to say it, I replied. Your actions have spoken clearly enough. When Julian shows interest in art, you buy him professional supplies and arrange private lessons. When Juniper creates extraordinary artwork that amazes her teachers, you barely acknowledge her accomplishments. When the twins need academic support, you provide private tutoring and enrichment programs. When Juniper needed therapeutic interventions, I had to fight insurance companies and research programs entirely on my own. The litany of disparities was finally being articulated in detail, and the cumulative effect was devastating. Each example built upon the previous one, creating an undeniable pattern of systematic discrimination against my daughter. Nathaniel looked genuinely troubled as the full scope of the favoritism became clear. I didn't realize it was this bad, he admitted quietly. I knew Mom and Dad were more involved with the boys, but I thought it was because Penelope and I lived closer. Geography isn't the issue, I explained, appreciating his apparent sincerity. The issue is that your children are seen as perfect representatives of family success while my daughter is viewed as a liability to be managed. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of small footsteps as Jasper and Julian crept closer to listen. Their presence reminded me that this confrontation was happening in front of children who were absorbing every word and learning lessons about family dynamics that would shape their understanding of love and acceptance. Boys, why don't you go play with your new toys upstairs? Penelope suggested gently, recognizing the inappropriateness of their presence during such an intense discussion. But Jasper, who was 8 and more perceptive than adults often credited, asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter: where is cousin Juniper? Why isn't she here for Christmas? The innocent inquiry from a child exposed the cruelty of the adult's decisions in a way that no amount of reasoned argument could accomplish. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly unprepared to explain their exclusion of Juniper to her young cousins. Juniper is celebrating Christmas at home today, my mother said carefully, avoiding any explanation for why this separation had occurred. But why? Julian persisted with the relentless curiosity of a 7-year-old. Last year she was here. She made those pretty drawings for everyone. I remembered those drawings, intricate holiday scenes that Juniper had spent weeks creating as gifts for each family member. She had poured her heart into those artistic expressions of love, and they had been received with polite acknowledgement before being relegated to drawers and forgotten. The boys' questions were highlighting the artificial nature of Juniper's exclusion in ways that adult rationalization couldn't obscure. Children understood instinctively that families should be together during holidays, and the absence of their cousin required explanations that would expose the ugly truth about their grandparents' priorities. Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately, my father suggested, clearly uncomfortable with the children witnessing the family's dysfunction. No, I said firmly. This conversation is long overdue, and the children deserve to understand why their cousin isn't here. They deserve to know that love in this family apparently comes with conditions and requirements that Juniper can't meet through no fault of her own. My mother's composure finally cracked under the pressure of sustained confrontation. We're doing the best we can in a difficult situation, she said, her voice rising with defensive emotion. Raising a child with special needs is challenging, and we've tried to be supportive. Supportive? I laughed bitterly. When have you ever been supportive? When did you offer to help with therapy appointments or educational advocacy? When did you celebrate her achievements or defend her against ignorant comments from your social circle? When did you treat her with the same enthusiasm and affection you shower on her cousins? The questions hung in the air unanswered because the truth was that my parents had never been genuinely supportive. They had tolerated Juniper's existence while hoping she would somehow become more convenient or less noticeable. The confrontation had reached a crucial turning point where years of accumulated resentment and disappointed hopes were finally being expressed with brutal honesty. The comfortable fiction that had allowed everyone to pretend our family dynamics were acceptable was crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence and direct challenge. What happened next would determine whether this crisis would lead to genuine healing and changed behavior, or whether it would result in permanent fractures that could never be repaired. The silence that followed my emotional outpouring lasted for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the gentle ticking of my parents' antique grandfather clock and the distant sound of holiday music drifting from their expensive sound system. Everyone in the foyer seemed to be processing the weight of truths that had finally been spoken aloud after years of careful avoidance. It was Jasper who ultimately shattered the adult standoff with the kind of innocent observation that only children can deliver with such devastating accuracy. "I think Cousin Juniper should be here," he announced with the matter-of-fact certainty of an 8-year-old who hadn't yet learned to navigate complex family politics. "She always draws the best pictures, and she knows everything about sea animals." His simple statement carried more moral authority than any adult argument because it came from a place of genuine affection unmarked by social calculations or image management concerns. Julian nodded in agreement, adding, "Last Christmas she taught me how to draw octopuses with all the tentacles in the right places." My mother's carefully constructed defenses began visibly crumbling as her grandsons unknowingly highlighted the artificial nature of Juniper's exclusion. These children didn't see autism as something shameful to be hidden. They saw their cousin as someone who contributed unique knowledge and creativity to their family experiences. "Boys, this is a complicated adult conversation," Penelope said gently, but Nathaniel surprised everyone by contradicting his wife. "Actually, maybe they should hear this," he said, his voice carrying a thoughtfulness I hadn't heard from him in years. "They're old enough to understand fairness, and they clearly love their cousin." I watched my brother with growing amazement as he seemed to be grappling seriously with the implications of our family's treatment of Juniper for the first time. His corporate success had always made him the golden child, but perhaps witnessing this confrontation was forcing him to examine dynamics he had previously taken for granted. My father made one final attempt to reassert control over the narrative. "This discussion has gotten out of hand," he declared with the authoritative tone that had ended arguments during my childhood. "Cassandra, you're upset, and understandably so, but accusations and ultimatums aren't going to resolve anything." "Then what will resolve it?" I asked directly, refusing to be dismissed. "What would it take for you to treat Juniper with the same love and respect you give to Jasper and Julian?" The question forced my parents to confront the choice I had presented them, acknowledge their favoritism and commit to change, or lose their relationship with their daughter and granddaughter entirely. For the first time in this confrontation, they seemed to recognize that I was serious about walking away from the family if nothing changed. My mother's composure finally broke completely. "We never meant to hurt her," she said, tears beginning to flow down her carefully made-up cheeks. We don't know how to handle her differences. We're afraid of saying the wrong thing or making situations worse." The admission was both heartbreaking and infuriating. "So instead of learning how to support her, you decided it was easier to exclude her," I replied, but my voice had lost some of its earlier anger. Fear and ignorance weren't excuses for their behavior, but they were at least honest explanations. "We could learn," Nathaniel said quietly, surprising everyone including himself. "Maybe we could all learn how to do better." Penelope nodded in agreement. "I've always felt uncomfortable about some of the differences in how the children are treated, but I didn't know how to address it without causing family conflict." My father, who had remained the most resistant to acknowledging any wrongdoing, finally spoke with something approaching humility. "We've made mistakes," he admitted grudgingly. "Perhaps we've been too focused on appearances and not enough on what truly matters." The breakthrough came gradually, built through small acknowledgments and tentative commitments to change. My parents agreed to educate themselves about autism, starting with resources I would provide. They committed to including Juniper in all future family gatherings without conditions or restrictions. Most importantly, they promised to work on seeing her differences as strengths rather than deficits. Nathaniel took immediate action by insisting that Christmas morning be restarted with Juniper present. "I'm calling Cassandra's house right now," he announced, pulling out his phone. "Juniper should be here for present opening, and we should all apologize to her for excluding her." The gesture was imperfect. The day's damage couldn't be entirely undone by retroactive inclusion, but it represented a genuine effort to make amends and establish new patterns of behavior. When we arrived back at my parents' house an hour later with Juniper in tow, the atmosphere was dramatically different. My mother knelt down to Juniper's eye level immediately upon our arrival, something I had never seen her do before. "Juniper, Grandmama made a mistake," she said simply. "I should have invited you to Christmas morning, and I'm very sorry that I didn't." Juniper, with the remarkable emotional resilience that many autistic children possess, accepted the apology gracefully. "It's okay, Grandmama. Mommy and I made pancakes that looked like snowflakes." The gift exchange that followed was still unequal. There was no way to immediately remedy years of systematic favoritism, but my parents made visible efforts to engage enthusiastically with Juniper's reactions to her presence. When she opened a small art supply kit, my mother asked genuine questions about her artistic interests and techniques. More significantly, when Juniper became excited about a marine biology book and began sharing detailed facts about jellyfish reproduction cycles, my parents listened with the same attention they typically reserved for the twins' achievements. My father even asked follow-up questions that demonstrated genuine interest in her knowledge. The transformation wasn't complete. Real change would require sustained effort over months and years, but the foundation for a healthier family dynamic had been established. For the first time in Juniper's life, she was experiencing Christmas morning as a truly welcomed member of our extended family. As the day progressed, I watched my daughter flourish in an environment of genuine acceptance. She played easily with her cousins, shared her encyclopedic knowledge about various topics, and contributed her unique perspective to family conversations without fear of judgment or dismissal. That evening, as we prepared to leave, my mother pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know that today opened my eyes to how special Juniper truly is," she said with evident sincerity. "We've wasted too much time being afraid of her differences instead of celebrating them. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Changing lifelong patterns of favoritism and exclusion would require constant vigilance and commitment from everyone involved. But for the first time since Juniper's birth, I felt hopeful that she might finally experience the unconditional grandparental love that every child deserves." The Christmas that had begun with exclusion and pain had ended with the possibility of genuine healing and acceptance, setting the stage for a family dynamic based on love rather than conditions, understanding rather than fear, and celebration of differences rather than shame about them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.